Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. I am Abe with MysticGenMara.com, a small town mystic from the middle of Idaho. And tonight, we are going back to our series called Myth and Tarot, where we look at a creature from mythology and then offer a reading for the critter itself. And tonight, we're going to continue our journey along the 12 labors of Hercules with labor number 8, the Mares of Diomedes. And his name, I messed this up a couple of times, so if I stumble over it, I do apologize. With that, if you're new here, hit that subscribe button, drop a like on the video, and comment. Let me know your thoughts as we go along. And just so we're clear, and I don't usually put these up, even though some of these have been a little bit weird, this one's a little bit gross, so if you're more squeamish, I will tone down the graphicness of it, but there are some parts that are just gross. So if that bothers you, just giving you a heads up here. So this middle section of the labors is really focused on the farm animals for some odd reason. But these are not simple mares in this instance, just like the Cretan bull was not just a simple bull. The mares are not just some female horses, there's a catch to these guys, or gals. So let's go take a wander into the Greek myths again. And so when we hop into the past, we find our hero Hercules. He just left the 7th labor with the Cretan bull, and we saw what kind of a mess that was, because they had the stables before that, and it's just been kind of gross. Once the Cretan bull was all dealt with, and King Eurystheus was sort of happy, you know, Hera's simp, he never really seems to be super happy. He had a new labor for Hercules. Of course he did. This one sounds really easy. The 8th labor was, and I still have not got my mouse switched over, was to steal the mares of Diomedes. He was a king of Thrace. And this isn't simple horse thievery. This one was kind of an odd one just because of what all went on here. The Mares of Diomedes, or the Mares of Thrace, were a wild and highly aggressive small herd of massive horses. So, and this is kind of the Hercules aspect of it. But when I say small herd of massive horses, we're not talking something simple here. The enemies of Thrace called these horses mad with wild rage. Sounds fun. I've met some of these horses. They were very beautiful, though. It is said they had sleek and shiny coats that gleamed in the sun like polished gold, with manes and tails that shimmered like the stars. Their hooves were of brass, and the sound would send chills through anyone who heard them coming. So this is kind of a darker representation of them, but it's along this lines. And when we talk about massive, I'm not talking like your standard, 16-hand pony. We're talking Clydesdales. The things that, the 6-foot-tall men are short next to, that's the size of horse we're talking about here. They're significant. And according to some sources, there were only 4, and most of the sources agree on this. There were some others that just said they had a herd of these horses, but most of the sources reference 4 mares. And they named them. The names are, well, we'll just go through the names. Podargos, which is the swift one. We have Lampon, the shining one. Dinos, the terrible one, which that's probably the coolest one to me. And then Xanthos, the yellow one. But that's its name, the yellow one. So apparently we had all these beautiful horses, one just happened to be more yellow than the others. Really strike fear in people with that one. These mares were controlled by the king of Thrace, a giant, literally, man named Diomedes. Well, Diomedes was the son of the god Ares, and a priestess called Serene. So he's, half man, half divine. We could call him a Nephilim if we were going down that particular rabbit hole, but he wasn't a normal-sized person. He was very large himself. And the mares were tethered by iron chains to a bronze manger. This manger was located in the now lost city of Turidia, and I'm guessing, just because of how everyone's chained up here, there's probably some fairy blood mixed in with the horses, because iron is the one thing that could hold them, but, fairies are another topic. They sound really super cool for horses. Gigantic brass hooves and shimmering and shining and really cool sounding animals, except for that Dinos character. He's a little terrible, or she's a little terrible. Honestly, Dino sounds a lot like a mule, but there's a catch. Did I mention that they only ate flesh? It was said that the mares were driven mad because they didn't eat like normal horses. They wouldn't eat like, straw, grass, pasture grub. No, they only would eat flesh from strangers who came too close. It's possible and referenced in one spot that they also would eat the flesh of prisoners. And they ate flesh as in human flesh. They liked the flavor of humans best. And it was said that once they sated their cravings, they would be calmed for a time before going mad again, demanding more human flesh. That's special. With their madness, they were also said to have gained the ability to belch fire when needed. Some sources said they breathed fire all the time. Others said it was an acquired skill that they could be called upon to use as needed. Yeah, not interested in these kind of horses personally. Talk about biting the hand that feeds you, quite literally, and hope that they stop at the hand. So now that we have an idea about these nightmarish creatures, why would King Eurystheus want them? Well, we'll get into that here in a second. Of course, as time does with stories, especially around Hercules, there are approximately 3 variations that I've found. 3 standardized variations. We'll make that clear. There was a couple of other ones that just didn't quite fit the narrative. They were one-offs, and I'm assuming, just my guess here, that they were more modern versions, but we're going to go with the more official ones, which is, there's 3 of them. Today I'm doing Synergy. It's the golden pineapple one. Again, not sponsored. Really, just I like this kombucha, so. So we're gonna go through each of the stories of how Hercules ends up with these mares. Story number 1. Hercules took several volunteers, including what is referenced as his favored companion, Abderus. And I had to go searching because this particular story, the way they phrase favored companion, it made me a little bit curious, because this time frame you didn't really favor someone unless there was something else going on. So as I was digging through the different terms and what could possibly have meant, Abderus shows up in this story a lot, and so I want to just mention, kind of go over a little bit about him. He was said to be the son of Hermes, so a divine hero. There is some speculation, judging by the title, he also could have been a son of Poseidon, which would have been the brother of Patroclus, another of, well, that was more of Achilles' thing, but it is said in some legends that he is Hercules' male lover at the time, which would also add to that reference that he was his favorite companion. And it was interesting as I was going through that, because Hercules was doing 12 labors because he went crazy and killed his wife and kids. But then you also have to remember, in this particular time period, especially in Greece, it was not uncommon to have a wife and kids and the whole thing, but also have a younger male partner. Not everyone did that, but it wasn't like, oh, ew, shameful. It was more of like, oh, they're wealthy, they can support two people. And that was kind of the concept with the Hercules thing. It's not referenced how long Hercules and Abderus, or Abderus was with Hercules, but that was one of the side notes that I wanted to put in here, because favored companion was referenced several times as we were going through this aspect of the story. So, back to the main story. The group would travel to Thrace and quietly approach the city of Teredia, where the horses were stabled. Hercules and his crew would best Diomedes' men, which were the guards of the mares. Not an easy task, but they did it. Hercules would then snap the iron tethers and drive the horses into the sea to prepare to sail back to Eurystheus. And there's a little bit of vagueness about this. Apparently, more of Diomedes' men came after them, so Hercules would have to leave the horses in the care of Abderus, but Hercules has to remember he's superhuman and had massive strength, so him holding on to the iron chains of the horses, he could at least keep them under control. Abderus, in the images that I saw, strikes me as not being as powerful, but that would make sense. If his father was Hermes, he wouldn't be as big and bulky as Hercules, and if he was a son of Poseidon, he would have been as big, but again, for whatever reason, he would hand over the horses to Abderus, and Hercules would continue to fight King Diomedes' men, and eventually fight King Diomedes himself. And it never made sense, other than maybe the king just wanted his property back and was willing to fight himself for it, but it didn't make clear in this why the king went after Hercules himself. You've got soldiers for that, send them. In any case, Hercules was unaware, or maybe didn't even believe the stories that these horses were they liked to eat people, and so he never left a warning with his men when he took off to go fight Diomedes and his men. Once Hercules had bested the king of Thrace and bound him to take back as a trophy, he would return to his favored companion, Abderus. And this is kind of a sad little part, because Abderus had been stomped and was being eaten by the mares. Hercules was so furious, and we're talking, he's got rage of a god going on here, that he fed Diomedes to his own mares while Diomedes was still alive. Just punishment as far as I'm concerned. Hercules was so distraught over the loss of Abderus, though, that it was said he shed tears for a very long while. And that also ties into the fact that there was more than just a friendship there. He would place the young man's body on Hercules' own Nemean lion robe while he would build a tomb for his young companion. And young as in like 20s, don't take that the wrong way. And he'd also build the town of Abdera to honor his lost lover. So, me being me, I had to find out what Abdera was and where it was. Oops, wrong one. So this is Abdera, the little red circle, boop, up here. And it's at the top of the Aegean Sea. Thrace is over here-ish. So you've got this, that's kind of where they were at, is they were almost away when they got caught, basically. And more modern pictures, if I can get everything moved around here, sorry. So this is one of the ruins from Abdera. I couldn't find like a good oceanside picture that wasn't like a personal tourist picture, but if you start looking them up, you'll see that there's some really beautiful areas, and Abdera is Abdera. It's really cool, and it was a trading port for years after this. And the lore about its founding was that it was founded by Hercules after he lost his favored companion. So, once Once the mares had calmed from eating Diomedes, their former master, Hercules would bind their mouths and take them on board his ship, and it would appear from there that they would leave Abdera, the new trading post, and go back to Greece. So that was story 1. Long story. Story 2, version 2, is Hercules and his men arrive on the island where Taradia was, and at this point Diomedes had been made aware of the task set forth by Hercules. In this one, it wouldn't surprise me if Eurystheus hadn't warned him ahead of time on purpose, and Diomedes was planning to attack the group once they fell asleep. Hercules, being semi-divine, sensed something was off and chose not to sleep the entire night. Instead, under the cover of darkness, he would go free the mares, drive them up onto a knoll on the south end of the island. He would dig a trench that would cut that section of the island off from the mainland, and when Diomedes' men would come to collect the horses, he easily picked them off and then fed them to his mares. Again, basically Diomedes doesn't do so well in any of these stories. After they were calm and fed, he would bind their mouths and back to Eurystheus. That one, to me, is kind of the least death on Hercules' side. Abderus is mentioned, but he's mentioned as being alive and healthy through this one, so that one's a better story. And then story 3, once arriving on the island, Hercules and his men hang back. Excuse me. I even write these things and I can't read them right. Hercules had his men hang back while he went to find King Diomedes. Hercules would take the king and bind him up and feed him to the mares the same night. The next day, Abderus would lead the way, and the Bistonians, which are the people that Diomedes had around him, they were his people, were discovering that their king was dead. They would pursue Hercules. Abderus would lead the mares in a wild charge, it was said, towards the men of Bistonia, and they would in turn flee in fear of the massive fire-breathing horses. And like I said, war horses were different. They didn't balk if you were being loud and scary. They would attack you. So basically, the first story, Abderus dies, justifying the creation of Abdera. In story 2 and 3, they just basically get the horses and take out Diomedes. So Diomedes doesn't do so well through this whole story, but the horses just depends on how they get off the island. So whichever story version you prefer, once back on the boat and headed away from Thrace, they would return to Eurystheus' land, and again, because, why would we have a easily continuous story, the timeline breaks a little bit here as well. So Hercules brought the calmed and bound horses back to King Eurystheus. Eurystheus would dedicate the mares to his patron, Hera. Of course he would. Little simp. I don't like this king. I know he has a part to play in this. That's part of the action. But when you really look into Eurystheus, and I might actually do a full one on him too, not so great. So after the horses come back and are dedicated to Hera, we have another split version. One version has Eurystheus, taking the mares to Mount Olympus to sacrifice the wild mares to the Greek gods. Zeus was so turned off by these horses and this offering that he would send bears, wolves, and lions to devour the horses. No more horses. The other version is a little bit nicer and actually plays into future stories, is Eurystheus would unbind the horses' mouths and set them free on the plains of Argos. And the reason for this is unclear, but when they were released into this area, they stayed calmed, and the massive mares would stop eating human flesh for whatever purpose, maybe it was their dedication to Hera, which would be weird considering what her history is like. And from there, they would breed, and their descendants would actually appear in later Greek myths. Personally, I think the second one, where they're just let go into the plains of Argos, makes more sense. Because one of our more modern day, we can prove that he existed heroes, was one of the mayor's descendants were used by Troy in the Trojan Wars. That's cool. And later, and this is one that we can prove existed at some point, the Alexander the Great's horse, the one that he references in a lot of his and a lot of the writing about him, Bucephalus, was a descendant of the Mares of Diomedes. Like I said, I think the second version makes more sense, where they're just kind of let to roam, because that would make sense how Bucephalus would actually become heir to them and one of the greatest war horses in Greece at that time, with Alexander the Great being his rider. So, with that, it is an interesting little tale that they have woven for us in that 12th labor, or 12th, jeez, 8th labor. My brain's checking out. Oh no. So with that, we'll hop over to our next aspect of myth and tarot, which is the tarot part. So what I do here is I read a simple Celtic cross spread for the horses in this case, just kind of giving us an idea of, I just had something move the wrong direction. That is not cool. Don't do that to me. No. Just 1 second. Technical difficulties, because of course, why not, right? I'll do a simple Celtic cross reading for our horses, and I read as if they're sitting in front of me, so they're sentient completely and not man-eating hungry beasts sitting across the table from me as we do our reading. And it's more for fun, just to kind of give us an idea of, if the horses were still roaming around somewhere, what would their little world be like? There is some lore, as I was digging through this, that they became part of one of the constellations. I don't remember which one exactly. It's a zodiac constellation. But as I was looking through it, it was tied to Pegasus, and I was like, well, if it's tied to Pegasus, then these horses didn't fly, and Pegasus didn't eat flesh, so I don't quite see the connection there. So I purposely didn't put all that information into my little notes, because it was more just, I mean, it was an interesting little tidbit, but if they didn't actually fit into the storyline there, why would you do that? So, but it was just, to me, it was just a fascinating little story, because I've read these tales before when I was in high school or grade school, something, I don't remember. I read a lot about Hercules growing up, but we also had Kevin Sorbo playing Legend of Hercules, and there was Xena, Warrior Princess, and so those were a lot of the shows that I cut my teeth on when I was younger as far as mythology goes. Totally inaccurate in most ways, but still a lot of fun and a good way to get your attention into the storyline. So, for our mares, where they are at right now, the tower indicates the significator. This is the mares themselves in this moment of time. There is definitely some creative destructions going on. They are in a period currently, and that's, if their descendants are still roaming around here, of rebuilding themselves. They've had their breakdown. They were torn apart by their history. Their history is not great, but they're in a period of, okay, now we've been kind of disassembled. How are we going to rebuild into something that's not as gross as it was? So that's where they're at in the moment. They're kind of in the process, what I'm hearing, of rebuilding. The energy that's crossing them, the thing that's their obstacle, you might say, is 3 of Chalices. No one really cares about these poor guys anymore. There's definitely this lackadaisical, like, laissez-faire. No one really worries about them. So they're in their own little corner of the world doing their rebuild. No one else is around them. No one really cares about them anymore, which might be hurting their feelings. We'll find out. Their higher self, their higher influences, is the Knave of Wands. There's definitely a little bit of passion, but now the passion has been tamed. It's used as a tool and not as free wheeling. It's not chaos, it's not disorder. So they've shifted from their original stance of just straight up destruction to more under their control. It could be the pacifying influence from a deity. I still am confused if that's Hera or not, because like I said, she's not the most calming influence. But there could be another aspect of the another deity that might be tied in there, and it could be just the fact that they're not bound in chains anymore. But that particular, the Knave of Wands, is a higher energy, a higher frequency that's kind of watching over and guarding them. Their subconscious energy, their root energy, their hidden energy is the Two of Chalices. So before I hold that up there, they're looking for partnership. Their shadow is a craving for a partner. They're craving for a connection, and it could be a connection even with a human rider, because if you watch people who have one horse and they dedicate their time with that horse, there's a bond that occurs there, and that could be the energy that they're searching for. It's this relationship, not so much amorous, but like a bonding of some form. And horses will bond with one owner. Sometimes they'll bond with two, but generally, and you can watch when you watch someone go out in the field and they whistle for their horse or they'll call the name, that horse will come running at full sprint to get to the person calling them. Now, someone else goes out there and calls them, they will straight up ignore them, because that's not the person they're bonded to. So they're looking for that bond and that connection, and that's their subconscious urges type energy. Their immediate past, and they're nothing that I found about the Mares of Diomedes said that they were an immortal being. They were just powerful and long-lived. So we're not talking immortals at this point. So their history will only go back, a few years. Is the Six of Chalices. Emotionally, they're just kind of numb. They're kind of observing things at this point. They're not really in an active state. They're not like, oh, we are currently doing stuff. Their history has been really quiet and very much just observation. I'm getting the impression that they also, during their history, were the only ones who were together. Like, the four of them were the only ones who could understand each other, and they were kind of clicked off because they just didn't feel comfortable with the rest of the world. Their immediate future is the Queen of Wands. So there's a little bit of that passion coming back for them, but again, it's been tempered by the divine feminine, Hera, which I just have a hard time saying that. And I have nothing against other goddesses, just I'm not a big fan of Hera. And so you've got this energy of the future going to be tempered and moderated by the divine feminine aspect. So their passion is going to come back. So they're still going to have that fiery spirit, but it's going to be under a different form of control. So their attitude. So how are our Mares of Diomedes? They're rebuilding themselves in the moment, so they're going through some growing pains. And there's a little bit of sadness with that, with the Five of Swords. There's a little bit of sadness because they know that there's a part of their history that they kind of regret, is what I'm getting. This card to me shows that there's some sadness when they realize what they have done, and that's part of what they're rebuilding, but their history is not the greatest, and they know that. So there's a remorseful looking back, and they're casting their eyes down. So they actually do feel not so much sadness, but they feel regret for what they've done, and that's why they're trying to grow and become something better. So their immediate environment, where are they now? Is the Four of Chalices. They're actually in a good place. They're still in their fields. They're still, doing their thing. And with what I'm getting from this image in this card with the Four of Chalices is that they actually are amongst the waves. Like maybe Poseidon brought them into his fold before they passed. But they're in a place where they're not being hurt and they're not being harmed. And there is this gentle energy around them. And the Four of Chalices, there's also a little bit of hope with that. But you have a lot of blue I'm getting, so we're talking about them being in the water. And maybe the water of Poseidon tied in with Hera, or whichever goddess is guarding them, is enough to temper their fiery nature. So, their hopes and fears is the Knight of Wands. So they're still working with that fire energy here. But we've got the Knight of Wands. It's a very active knight. I think this is the most active of the knights. With the wands, the fire aspect of it, there's a lot of fear that they're going to turn back into what they were, the thing that made them feared, and they don't want to be that anymore. Their hope is being able to control their passions, being able to rein in the parts of them that are out of control, so that they can, be accepted. And that's not to say that they want to be accepted by everybody. That's not the case. They just don't want to be out of control where humans can't interact with them because of, that fear of being eaten. So your outcome, how everything plays out for our mares here, is the Knight of Swords. So we're still working with that more mental energy, the air energy of swords, but you still have a lot of the blue. So the mares are going to, their outcome is they're going to be able to return in a form, but it's going to be under the control of mental acuity, mental strength. They are going to come in, but it's going to be a tempered. Their fire is not going to be allowed, and you can see that with all the blue that's around, to help tone them down and rein them in from their total chaos and destruction that they were doing beforehand. So overall, it looks like our mares are doing the proper work, and as long as they stick with their divine guidance from whoever this future card is indicating, this divine feminine fire, like I said, if it's Hera, that would be a shock to me because she's not the most stable of people, but we'll get into that later. But that's where we're at, is they do actually look like everything's kind of going good for them. They are in a good spot, possibly in Poseidon's seas, being guarded by a divine feminine nature, being taught a different way that doesn't have all their passion and fire tearing at them. And they've got definitely a more calm outlook. They're going through a rebuilding and growth process because their main card is the Tower. So overall, I think our horses, our mares, might actually be able to return if things go well for them. And again, we're talking mythology here, but it is fun to speculate. So with that, I will make sure I'm not missing anything. Doesn't look like it. Okay, so one more little subscriber or liking grift here. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button. If you enjoy this type of content and these type of streams, please hit that subscribe like mess and let me know what you think in the comments down below. I think I've got, let's see, there's 12 laborers, we're on labor 8, so we've got about 4 more laborers. One of the labors though is tied to a creature I already have done before, so I'll have to think about whether or not I'm going to finish that one, or if I'm going to redo that, or just kind of bounce on to the rest of the Greek myths. But for now, that's where we're at. We've got at least 3, possibly 4 more of the Hercules Labors and their creatures. And if you have any ideas, thoughts, suggestions, let me know in the comments. I'm always checking those to see what you guys think. I have a huge list of creatures and characters that I want to go over, but I can always add another one if I happen to. Who knows, you might know someone that I didn't even realize was there. So I will have a great rest of your day, and I will see you in a future video.